Carried away by the frenzy of dance, it seemed to me that I was experiencing an ultimate exhilaration, like an erotic seizing where the possibility of happiness is shown light. So much so that I no longer felt the master of myself, as if compelled by a higher force, thrown headlong into the battle of my heart, speechless, blinded by the circumstances, as by a failure of the universe where I no longer could answer for anything. The atmosphere of the garden seemed transfigured by this sudden eruption of an overplayed romance, in the same way as if I, too, were a grotesque caricature from Commedia dell'arte, the volcanic incarnation of a love-stricken Lelio whirling gracefully at Isabella's side. And as the cold and depopulated banality of the scene could not refrain from assaulting contemplation, I was taken aback by the impression of waltzing at the court of Henry II, dancing amongst the courtiers, dazzled by the abundance of fabric and the opulence of gems, jewels of the sky shimmering at the edge of the cosmos, wildfire's nebulae everlastingly thrown against her incendiary pupil. The music, which I had already heard 1,000 times, not because it aroused any particular taste in me, but because I was used to hearing it often as any song that was said to be à la mode, seemed to take on a more melancholic, truer aspect, as if it was of the heart, a momentary affection, bearing an imperceptible resonance like one of a wall where hides a secret room. Under the light of the stars, the strains of a common melody, as if outside of itself, seemed to assume the grandiose solemnity of an opera, where each note, each chord, each harmony, separated from the rest by a spontaneous suspension of time, made audible an echo, entirely inhabited by an artist concerned, thrilled by a sacred revelation. A banal refrain, where the words uttered from a signified, now signifying, seemed to take on the nature of an ancient psalmody, liturgy of the angel, where ran out the temptation of language, and I had the impression that the true taste of happiness was this hand offered from divine favor, in the same way as if this dance, immemorial, had lasted a lifetime. The figure of Oriane, illuminated by the white refraction of the moon, had the opaline delicacy of a porcelain effigy placed against my slough, like the centerpiece of a collection at place of honor on the ascent of a pedestal, infinitely more delicate to be thus revealed to the world in the simple apparatus of her nudity, a body revered as a sacramental relic, more alive than it had ever been in this propitious intimacy, gently offered, baiting at all moments the occult gestures of a snake charmer. At the very short distance where I stood before her, transfixed by her stare, immersed in the lantern of her eyes, as if she were no longer thinking about anything, it seemed that the corners of her lips were faintly creased, and the smile she then destined to me felt to exhale a more confidential quality than all the smiles she had offered me before, following innocently, like an open hand, the countless and captivating suggestions of my thoughts, barely touched, already abandoned, and I felt transcended by an intimate geography of the body that surrenders, debases, crystallizes into a hybrid mutation of love, alas, visibly readable when thus consecrated, an idol gravely adorned, radiant, from a conjunction of light, like the heroine of a Mahou shoujo, precious in the alienated communion of each of my movements, gently naive, inflamed by a tie-in of amity where two solitudes were beating in unison. The perception pushed to the extreme of a half-spoken connivance, independent of speech, a dizzying correspondence of symptoms that rendered exactly the devouring faculty of a sensual simulacrum as if it was a torpor that froze me into place. Never had I felt more certainly the translation of our relation than during this dance, with a knotted throat, eyes on the verge of tears, and similarly, simultaneously, this sacred emotion that had caught me off guard, that made me embody at pleasure the role of a captive in the incomplete time of exchange where this cavalier, whom I seemed to know everything about, refused to betray, as if on purpose, her adoration for me. Its adoration seemed to me more evident than anything in my life, a renewed sense, like from inhibition, a total clarity. She was finally going to appear, her, definitively there in front of my eyes. An invisible boundary seemed to stand between us, and the brightness that invaded her gaze, consumed like the moon in the whites of her eyes, reflected an indecisive glow of terra incognita, irreducible, absolute, taking over everything, from which I couldn't escape, frozen, fixed, fascinated by the sudden interruption at the heart of night, of movement. But suddenly, without warning, it seemed to me that her voice, audible again, had become muffled, shaking imperceptibly like a whisper, as if the decision to confide had been made on the spot, mechanically, without thinking about it. And I understood that without daring to express it out loud, almost shyly, Ariane, on the border of a feverish excitement, like a disoriented complicity, in a way a broken fragment of a mirror, barely touching the skin, tears it apart, was trying to tell me something. Suddenly, much more sure of herself than I had imagined, so close to a breakpoint that I felt a shock right against my breathless heart, I caught a glimpse of her, or rather, in her, the glimpse of something completely unexpected, like of her consciousness, a clandestine disposition. Under the drowned arc of the sky, an exceptional invitation to languor and devotion seemed to frolic, like the lyrical testimony of an expected tenderness. And then, almost imperceptibly, as if against her will, Ariane delicately placed her head against my shoulder, pushing me back against the wall, and, in the very manifestation of a terminal solicitude, whispered in my ear, "I'm having a wonderful evening." There was an admirable moment of silence, as if a countdown hesitated to begin, and then slowly, with infinite efforts of caution, as if inhabited as sovereignly by confidence as a saint by prayer, something happened under the balcony overlooking the terrace, hidden from view. Something even more rare and bewildering than the naked flash of a rested head. Suddenly, a prodigious embrace against my cheeks, the wave of her hair penetrated by the heady and incomparable scent of oriental roses, irritating, voluptuous, like a secret shiver, imperceptible, like an echo to the outburst of my heart. And I felt dazzled by a shock, submerged by this avowal of the body, like by a cataract, suddenly caught, already released by inalienable instinct to preserve desire, capsized, suspended entirely on Ariane's lips, mobile once again, heated by an almost inaudible clamour of transgression, as if in defence to enter. Another sight of the night where it seemed to hide in filigree a crucial plea, and her to add, manorial with a sigh, "Come, follow me, let's go back inside." And at that precise moment, out of myself, I would have followed her, without a word crossing my lips, to the end of the world.